When it comes to serial killers, Edmund Kemper is not the first name that comes to mind for most people. Nicknamed the Co-Ed Killer, however, Kemper's story is one of the scariest and most complex in American criminal history. His ruthlessness and method of committing murders not only shocked the public, but also gave criminologists a headache to explain. So what made a gentle-looking boy who grew up in a small California town one of the most famous serial killers of the 20th century? Edmund Kemper was born on December 18, 1948, the third child in the family. From a young age, Kemper showed unusual signs, from cruelty to animals to imaginary games about death. The strained relationship with the oppressive mother created an environment rife with violence and mental abuse, which psychologists later claimed contributed to the development of his criminal acts. Why young girls? The answer probably lies in the complex and distorted relationships Kemper has experienced with women in his life, especially his mother. Throughout his childhood, Kemper was raised in fear and contempt by his authoritarian mother, who did not hesitate to express contempt for his growing sexuality and strength. Psychologists believe that Kemper's actions towards his victims, all young women whom he regularly seduces with his superficial intelligence and charm, are a distorted way for him to manipulate and avenge his mother's image in each victim. Kemper's murders were not only crimes, but they were complex events driven by a morbid mind, seeking to escape its own psychological nightmare. Every murder, from the first victim to the last, reveals not only unimaginable brutality, but also a deeply disturbed mind, a terrifying intelligence that may have led him too far into sin. This article is not only an insight into the nature and psychology of a serial killer, but also a terrifying reminder of what can happen when oppression and domestic violence are combined with untreated psychological instability. By exploring the life and crimes of Edmund Kemper, we can learn many lessons, not only about how, but also about why people are able to commit such atrocities. The other question is not just how and why, and the answer to that question can help us deepen our understanding of human nature and how we handle the seeds of crime in modern society. Edmund Emil Kemper III was born on December 18, 1948, in Burbank, California, the third of three children. His parents, Edmund Kemper Jr. and Clarnell Elizabeth Kemper, had a tempestuous marriage, with many of the acrimonious quarrels that little Kemper had witnessed since childhood. Kemper grew up in a family where conflict and discord were commonplace, which shaped many aspects of his later personality and behavior. The relationship between Kemper and his mother, Clarnell, was particularly problematic. Clarnell frequently criticized and belittled his son physically and mentally, calling him stupid, and asserting that no woman would ever love him. She regularly locked Kemper in their basement, where he felt rejected and isolated. These actions not only caused outrage but also aroused the deep hatred that Kemper later directed at his victims. Early on, Kemper showed signs of deviant behavior. He regularly bullied and tortured his sister, and even made pretend executions that he and his sister participated in, with Kemper always acting as the executioner. He also had a violent instinct towards animals, once burying a living cat alive and then digging it up to cut off its head. This behavior was one of the earliest warning signs of the serious psychological problems that would later lead to his murderous actions. When his parents divorced in 1957, Kemper was sent to live with his paternal grandparents on a remote farm in North Fork, California. Here, the environment was less controlled, and Kemper began to develop illusions of power and control, frequently carrying hunting rifles. His violent acts became more apparent when he killed his grandmother coldly, then killed his grandfather for fear he wouldn't tolerate finding out his wife was dead. After these murders, Kemper was diagnosed with mental problems and sent to the Atascadero Psychiatric Hospital, where he was diagnosed with a high IQ, but also with serious mental disorders. His time at Atascadero taught him how to hide his sinister tendencies, making him a more effective predator after his release in 1969. Returning to society, Kemper was unable to adapt normally. He committed mass murders, targeting the young girls he saw as symbols of what he could not obtain due to his isolation and helplessness. Eventually, the heightened hatred turned towards his mother, leading to his final act of murder before confessing. Edmund Kemper's biography is a cautionary tale of what can happen when domestic violence and psychological instability are not effectively addressed. Kemper's cruelty was not only the result of the psychological disorders he carried within him, but also the result of a stressful and unacceptable environment he experienced during his early years. Kemper's story, though extremely tragic and gruesome, provides an opportunity to gain a deeper understanding of the connection between mental disorders, domestic violence, and later criminal behavior, and provides important lessons about the importance of early intervention. After his release from the psychiatric hospital, Kemper tried to reintegrate into society, but was isolated and unable to find acceptance from his family and society. He moved in with his mother in Aptos, California, and soon tensions between the two recurred. The shared life with his mother, who continued to criticize and despise him, became one of the main factors driving Kemper to become a serial killer. He used his generous and intelligent appearance to lure victims, often female students, before brutally killing them. Kemper's criminal journey was not only shocking in its brutality, but also in his ability to hide his true nature from those around him. He spent his evenings drinking with local police officers, where he learned much about how crime was investigated, which kept him out of the spotlight for a long time. This shows the complexity and calculation of Kemper in carrying out his offenses. Edmund Kemper's story is a terrifying reminder of the long-term consequences of domestic violence and carelessness in addressing mental health issues. It is also a good example of how society can play a role in forming a mass murderer through ignoring early warning signs and failing to provide the necessary support and intervention. Kemper was eventually arrested and convicted of multiple counts of murder, but his story is still there, raising many questions about how we view and handle people with serious mental disorders in society. The case of Edmund Kemper has gone down in criminal history not only because of his cruelty, but also because of his sophisticated machinations and the way he covered up his crime. From his first murders in 1964 until his arrest in 1973, Kemper committed many horrific murders, making him one of America's most notorious serial killers. His criminal trail consisted of two stages: the murders of his young grandparents and a series of subsequent college girl murders, earning him the nickname the Co-Ed Killer. Edmund Kemper's criminal trail began very early. In 1964, at the age of 15, Kemper killed his paternal grandparents. Living with them on a remote farm in North Fork, California, Kemper began to harbor feelings of anger, especially with his grandmother. One day, out of control, he shot his grandmother with a rifle. Shortly thereafter, when his grandfather returned home, Kemper continued to shoot and kill him on the grounds that he did not want him to suffer when he saw his wife dead. This showed early signs of a disordered mentality, where Kemper believed his murder was a way to control or protect. The murder of his paternal grandparents led to Kemper being sent to Atascadero State Hospital. There, he was diagnosed as having symptoms of schizophrenia. During his time at the hospital, Kemper had access to records of other sex offenders and learned a lot from others. He quickly developed the ability to manipulate and deceive psychiatrists, leading them to believe that he had made a full recovery. After 5 years, Kemper was released, returned to society with a clean resume, but hatred and violent fantasies remained. After his release in 1969, Kemper returned to live with his mother in Santa Cruz, California. During this time, his relationship with his mother, Clarnell, continued to be strained. Mrs. Clarnell frequently criticized and humiliated her son, blaming him for the difficulties of her life. The controlling and abusive nature of the mother became one of the main factors that provoked Kemper's later atrocities. In May 1972, Kemper began a string of serial killings targeting female college students. With his car and his tall, friendly appearance, he easily persuaded the young girls to hitchhike. He often pretended to be a harmless driver, carefully garnering their trust before attacking. These rides quickly turned into deadly traps, as Kemper took the victims to remote areas where he brutally murdered them. Mary Ann Pesce and Anita Lucchesa were were the first two victims in Kemper's murder chain. On May 7, 1972, he picked them up from the university and took them to a remote area. There, Kemper killed them both by strangling and stabbing them. He then took their bodies to his apartment, where he dismembered them and dumped them in different locations. The scary thing is, even while the police were searching for the killer, Kemper continued to live a normal life, even communicating with many police officers at bars near the house. Then, on September 14, 1972, Aiko Ku, a 15-year-old schoolgirl, became Kemper's next victim. She was abducted by Kemper while trying to hitchhike to a ballet lesson. Kemper strangled Aiko to death and, as in previous cases, carried her body back to his apartment to perform perverted acts with the corpse. Cindy Shaw, an 18-year-old schoolgirl, was Kemper's next victim. He killed Cindy in January 1973 and then continued to dismember her in his bedroom. In particular, Kemper kept Cindy's head and buried it under his mother's bedroom window, as a link in his psyche. For Kemper, this was a symbolic act related to the deep control and hatred he felt for his mother. In February 1973, Kemper went on to commit two other horrific murders, kidnapping and murdering Rosalind Thorpe and Allison Liu, two other female college students. This time, he shot and killed them right in his car and then continued to perform the same acts of dismemberment. His victims' body parts were disposed of at various locations around the area. The climax of Kemper's criminal streak came in April 1973, when he carried out an action he had dreamed of all his life, killing his mother, Clarnell Kemper. He struck Mrs. Clarnell to death with a hammer while she slept, then proceeded to cut off her head and commit abominable acts with her body. Kemper held his mother's head in the living room and threw darts at it, symbolizing his anger at all that he felt she had done to him. Not stopping there, Kemper also invited a close friend of his mother's to come to the house, then murdered her to hide the crime. After committing these acts, Kemper left Santa Cruz and drove for 3 days to Pueblo, Colorado. There, he called the police and confessed to the whole chain of his crimes. Edmund Kemper's series of crimes was not only cold and cruel murders, but also a complex and morbid psychological journey. Each murder he committed showed deep hatred and distorted illusions of power and control. His crimes are a terrifying reminder of the consequences that domestic violence, neglect, and psychological instability can bring to an individual, and also a testament to the complexity in the minds of serial killers. The story of Edmund Kemper is not only famous for his heinous murders, but also for his psychological complexity. Kemper was more than just an ordinary serial killer. He was the embodiment of psychological instability and mental breakdown that lasted for years. To understand the origins of his violent behavior, it is necessary to look deeply into the psychological factors that have affected his development, including his strained relationship with his mother, the possibility of psychiatric disorders such as schizophrenia, and the impact of domestic abuse and neglect. One of the most powerful psychological factors affecting Kemper was his conflicting relationship with his mother, Clarnell Kemper. From an early age, Kemper suffered constant mental abuse from his mother. Clarnell was an authoritarian woman who constantly despised her son and constantly emphasized that Kemper would never be loved by others, especially women. She frequently criticized, insulted, and satirized Kemper, calling him a failure, making him feel demeaned and worthless. Hatred for his mother became one of the main drivers of Kemper's offense. In later interviews, Kemper admitted that his crimes against women were not merely acts of random violence, but subconscious reprisals against his mother. He saw his victims as surrogates for Clarnell, and by killing them, he tried to release his resentment and repressed anger. The culmination of this hatred came in April 1973, when Kemper finally killed his mother. The culmination of this hatred came in April 1973, when Kemper finally killed his mother. He then committed gruesome acts with her body, including beheading and using her head as a symbol to relieve his anger. Kemper also cut off his mother's vocal cords and tried to destroy them in the garbage disposal, with the aim of blocking the screams that she had used to abuse him throughout her adult years. This act was not only a crime, but also a way for Kemper to fulfill the sick delusions he had nurtured all his life. This is the crux of the pathological relationship between Kemper and his mother, a relationship that has shaped his entire behavior towards women. Kemper was diagnosed with schizophrenia at a very young age, after killing his paternal grandparents in 1964. At Atascadero State Hospital, doctors have found clear signs of serious mental disorders. Kemper has delusions and displays distortions in thinking, especially with regard to control and power. Schizophrenia is one of the complex psychological diseases, affecting the ability to distinguish between reality and delusion. People with this condition often experience irrational thoughts and distorted images of reality. For Kemper, the disease led him to develop delusions of total control over others, especially women. His combination of schizophrenia and high intelligence created a killer that was not only intelligent, but also extremely dangerous. He knew how to manipulate others and deceive psychologists to escape supervision. During his incarceration at Atascadero, Kemper learned to manipulate the psychologists, leading them to believe he had recovered and was no longer a threat. This not only showed his superior intelligence, but also the level of complexity in Kemper's psychopathology. When he was released, he was not only a dangerous criminal, but also an individual capable of perfectly concealing his true nature under a friendly and approachable appearance. However, the distortion in Kemper's thinking did not stop at murder. He frequently committed abominable acts with the bodies of his victims, including having sex with corpses. These were not only random acts of violence, but also ways he exercised his absolute power over the bodies of others. This behavior, known as necrophilia, demonstrates the depth of Kemper's psychological distortion, as he sees victims not as people, but as objects to be controlled and conquered. One of the other important factors in Kemper's psychological analysis was the impact of domestic abuse and neglect. Kemper's parents divorced when he was young, and since then, he has experienced a tumultuous and lonely childhood. After his parents separated, Kemper was sent to live with his mother, and from there, the mental abuse began. Clarnell not only insulted him on a daily basis, but also isolated him from other members of his family and society. She regularly locked Kemper in the basement, making him feel imprisoned and rejected. The feeling of being isolated and unloved was ingrained in Kemper's psyche, making him a person full of hatred and discontent with the world around him. The absence of affection and acceptance from the family led Kemper to develop delusions of seeking control and power through violence. His murderous behavior was not only the result of schizophrenia, but also the reaction of someone who had been deeply traumatized for years. Kemper's father's rejection of him also played an important role in forming negative emotions in him. Edmund Kemper Jr., whom Kemper had always idolized, was unable to maintain a normal paternity after his divorce from his mother. When Kemper tried to re-establish a relationship with his father, he was rejected outright, which added to the feeling of abandonment and helplessness in his mind. Kemper was unable to find empathy and acceptance from anyone in his life. The abuse from his mother, the refusal from his father, and the long feeling of loneliness had turned him into an individual full of resentment and despair. From there, he turned to violence as a way to relieve and assert himself, by controlling innocent victims and turning them into tools to fulfill his illusions of power. Edmund Kemper's psychological analysis showed that he was not only a sadistic killer, but also the product of prolonged psychological instability. Brought up in a home environment full of abuse and rejection, toxic relationships with his mother, rejection of his father, and schizophrenia came together to create an individual full of hatred and delusions of power.